Show me. No, don't show me.
He wore a fur coat, quoted Polish proverbs, and solved crimes that shouldn't have been solvable. Banacek wasn't just a TV detective. He was a statement, a wealthy, arrogant, impossibly charming Boston outsider who made the establishment sweat every single week. But behind those perfectly tailored suits and that slow, dangerous smile, nothing about this show came easy. The star fought the network fought back. The impossible crimes almost broke the writer's room. And the man who played Thomas Banacek, he was every bit as difficult as his character, maybe more. These are 20 weird facts about Banacek, the 1972 mystery series that was too smart, too stubborn, and too good-looking to last forever. And the bonus? A cancellation story so strange it still makes people argue at conventions 50 years later. Stay close. This one twists. Number 1. George Peppard didn't just play Thomas Banacek, he fought for him. Hard. When NBC first developed the concept of a wealthy Boston insurance investigator solving seemingly impossible crimes, the character on the page was generic. Polished, yes. Clever, sure. But he had no roots, no soul, no edge. Just another smooth TV detective in a long line of smooth TV detectives. Peppard changed that. He walked into the development meetings and said the character needed to be Polish-American, not vaguely European, not ambiguously ethnic. Specifically, proudly, unmistakably Polish. NBC hesitated. This was 1972. Polish Americans on American television were mostly punchlines, the butt of jokes whispered in green rooms and shouted on variety shows. Nobody put a Polish man at the center of a prestige mystery series and made him the smartest person in every room. Peppard didn't care about the hesitation. He pushed. He argued that the specificity was the point, that Banacek's outsider status within Boston's WASP establishment wasn't a liability. It was the engine that drove every episode. A man who didn't belong, who was never going to be invited into the club, and who was better than everyone in that club anyway. NBC eventually gave ground. And the moment they did, Banacek became something entirely different from anything else on television. Not a detective who solved crimes, a man who made the world admit he was right, one impossible case at a time. Number 2. The show lived inside a wheel, and most viewers had no idea. Banacek didn't air as a standalone series in the traditional sense. It rotated as part of NBC's Wednesday Mystery Movie, a programming block that shared its weekly time slot with other rotating mystery series including Columbo, McCloud, and Macmillan and Wife. Each show took turns occupying the same Wednesday night real estate, meaning Banacek only aired roughly once a month rather than weekly like a conventional series. On paper, that sounds like a disadvantage. In practice, it was the opposite. Each episode was given an extended runtime, running closer to 90 minutes than the standard 60, which meant the writing room had space to breathe. The impossible crimes at the heart of every episode weren't just gimmicks. They were fully constructed puzzles with room to unfold properly. The longer format gave the show the feel of a small film rather than a procedural episode, and audiences responded to the texture. They didn't just watch Banacek, they settled in for it. NBC's wheel concept was controversial at the time, and network executives quietly worried that audiences would lose track of rotating shows. But Banacek proved the model worked. The rarity of each episode made it feel like an event. People planned around it, and when it aired, the room went quiet. Not every show gets that kind of attention. Banacek earned it. Number 3. The Polish proverbs were never supposed to be funny, but they became the most quoted lines in the show. In nearly every episode, Banacek delivers a piece of traditional Polish folk wisdom at the exact right moment, usually when he's about to make someone feel embarrassed for underestimating him. The proverbs were specific, layered, and always slightly untranslatable in a way that left the other characters slightly off balance. Lines delivered with that slow, satisfied, peppered smile that made it clear he knew exactly what he'd just done. What most viewers didn't know was that the writing team put genuine research into sourcing authentic Polish expressions, then worked to adapt them for dramatic timing without losing their original texture. Some were real proverbs pulled from Polish oral tradition. Others were crafted to feel like they could have been. The goal was always the same: Give Banacek a cultural vocabulary that nobody else in the room shared, so that every time he quoted one, he was simultaneously informing and distancing himself from the people around him. It worked spectacularly. Fan mail frequently mentioned the proverb specifically, with viewers writing in to ask if the sayings were real, where they came from, what books they could read to find more. A small piece of Polish intellectual tradition had quietly slipped into the American television mainstream, and it arrived wearing a cashmere coat, sipping expensive cognac, and looking like it owned the place. Number 4. Thomas Banacek was rich. Genuinely, absurdly, unapologetically rich. And that was the most radical thing about him. American television in 1972 was not comfortable with heroes who didn't need anything. The format demanded vulnerability, financial pressure, a reason to take the case. Private eyes were broke. Cops were working class. Even the sophisticated detectives of that era had something they needed: a debt to pay, a reputation to rebuild, a wrong to right. Banacek needed nothing. He lived in a Boston brownstone that looked like a private museum. He drove a chauffeured Rolls-Royce. He ate at the finest restaurants and ordered without looking at the price. He collected 15% of recovered insurance claims, meaning every solved case added to a fortune he was already comfortable sitting on. The show never apologized for any of it. It never gave him a tragic backstory to justify the wealth or a hidden wound to make the luxury feel earned. He was simply a man who had built an extraordinary life through extraordinary intelligence, and he intended to enjoy every square inch of it. For network television, that was almost shocking. Heroes were supposed to struggle. Banacek didn't struggle. He arrived, he observed, he collected his check, and he went home to his brownstone and his cognac. Audiences found it almost offensive. Then they found it thrilling. Then they couldn't stop watching. Number 5. The impossible crimes weren't just plot devices. They were architecture. Every episode of Banacek was built around a central crime that couldn't have happened, except it did. A fully armored tank vanishing from a military convoy. A racehorse disappearing from a locked stable in front of dozens of witnesses. A priceless painting stolen from a sealed and guarded room without a single alarm being triggered. The writing team understood that the impossibility wasn't the mystery. It was the promise. The audience needed to believe, at least for 90 minutes, that this thing genuinely could not be explained by conventional logic. If the setup felt cheap or solvable too early, the whole structure collapsed. So, the writers pushed themselves. They obsessed over logistics. They argued about physics and timing and human psychology. They mapped every crime on paper before writing a single line of dialogue, checking for holes, checking for cheats, making sure the impossible things was truly impossible until the exact moment Banacek made it look obvious. The result was a show that attracted a very specific kind of viewer. Not just mystery fans, puzzle solvers, people who watched with a notepad, who rewound scenes, who wrote long letters to the production team pointing out details. Banacek didn't have casual fans. It had devotees. And that loyalty, built episode by episode around a shared obsession with the impossible, is exactly what keeps the show alive in the conversation 5 decades later.
Have flocked here to the site, hampering the efforts of investigators to gather new information.
Number 6. George Peppard was not easy to work with. That is the polite version. The longer version involved stories that circulated through Hollywood for years after production wrapped, whispered between directors and producers and network executives who had sat across the table from him in one difficult meeting or another. Peppard was demanding in a way that went beyond typical star behavior. He had opinions about everything: the scripts, the camera angles, the casting of guest performers, the way scenes were cut in the editing room. He fought for Banacek's specificity at every level, which was admirable, but he also had a talent for making those fights personal and exhausting in a way that wore people down. Directors who came onto the show quickly learned that Peppard wasn't just the lead actor. He was the de facto creative authority on set, and working around that reality required either genuine submission or extraordinary diplomatic patience. Some directors found a rhythm with him. Others left the experience vowing never to return. What made the situation more complicated was that Peppard was usually right. His instincts for the character were sharp and consistent in a way that served the show deeply. He knew who Banacek was at a molecular level, but being right and being easy to work with are two entirely different things, and Peppard rarely managed both at the same time. The crew respected him. Some of them genuinely admired him. Almost none of them would describe working with him as relaxing. Number 7. Felix Mulholland wasn't supposed to be important. When the production team first sketched out the supporting characters around Thomas Banacek, his old friend Felix, the proprietor of a rare bookshop in Boston, was meant to be a minor recurring presence, a source of local color, someone for Banacek to have a quiet conversation with between the big moments. What they didn't fully anticipate was Murray Matheson. The British actor brought something quietly extraordinary to Felix, a warmth and dry wit that created perfect counterpoint to Peppard's controlled intensity. The two men had genuine chemistry on screen, the kind that can't be manufactured in a casting session and can't be written into a script. It just exists between two people, or it doesn't. Between Peppard and Matheson, it existed completely. The bookshop scenes became some of the most consistently beloved moments in the series. Viewers wrote in about Felix specifically. They wanted more of him. They asked if there was a Felix-centered episode in development. The production team responded to that enthusiasm by expanding the character gradually across both seasons, giving him more texture, more history, more weight. What started as a minor note in the background, arrangement grew into one of the show's most distinctive instruments. Felix Mulholland became proof that television's best secondary characters aren't built in writers' rooms. They arrive on set inside the right actor and refuse to stay small. Number 8. The Rolls-Royce wasn't just a prop, it was a position. Every episode opened with the same visual grammar: a Boston street, a car that doesn't belong, and inside it, Thomas Banacek, already several moves ahead of everyone, waiting for him at the crime scene. The choice of a Rolls-Royce as Banacek's vehicle was deliberate and specific in a way the production team discussed at length before the first frame was ever shot. The car had to be right. It couldn't be a flashy sports car, which would read as self-conscious. It couldn't be a standard luxury sedan, which would blend into the Boston establishment scenery. It needed to be something that declared its presence quietly and absolutely, the way Banacek himself declared his presence quietly and absolutely. The Rolls-Royce, chauffeured, unhurried, arriving at crime scenes the way a surgeon arrives at an operating room, was exactly that. It also served a practical narrative function that the writers quickly learned to exploit. When the Rolls pulled up, something was about to change. It became a visual cue the audience read instantly. Whatever chaos or confusion or official incompetence was currently occupying the screen, the man in the back of that car was about to reorganize it entirely. Guest directors who came onto the show sometimes underused the car. The best ones understood immediately that it was a character, not a vehicle, and they shot it accordingly. Number 9. The insurance angle was a genuinely original idea in 1972, and the network almost killed it. When the concept of Banacek was being developed, the decision to make him an insurance investigator rather than a conventional detective, cop, or government agent felt risky to NBC executives who worried that insurance investigations sounded dry and bureaucratic on paper. The instinct to replace it with something more familiar was strong in the early development conversations. A private detective with a mysterious past, a retired government operative, something with more obvious dramatic texture. The creators held firm. Their argument was simple and turned out to be exactly right. The insurance framework gave Banacek something no traditional detective format could provide: a financial stake that was genuinely his own. He wasn't working for the law, he wasn't working for a client, he was working for 15%, and that percentage was real money attached to real outcomes. It made every case personal, in a way that felt honest rather than manufactured. It also gave the show a clean, logical reason for why Banacek was always in the room. He was there because he had something to gain, and that transparency was refreshing in a genre where detectives often had murky or implausible reasons for inserting themselves into complex criminal investigations. The insurance frame didn't limit the show, it liberated it. Once NBC stopped worrying about it sounding dry and watched what Peppard did with the concept, they stopped arguing. Number 10. Carly Davidson was ahead of her time, and the show knew it. When the character of Carly was introduced as a representative of the insurance company that reluctantly hired Banacek for her cases, the production team made a quiet but significant creative choice. They didn't write her as a foil, a love interest, or a comic obstacle. They wrote her as a professional, a smart, capable, slightly exasperated woman, operating at the same intellectual level as Banacek himself, differing from him not in competence, but in approach. Christine Belford brought something precise and watchful to the role. She gave Carly an inner life that the scripts sometimes only sketched, and that Belford filled in completely. The dynamic between Banacek and Carly walked a careful line. There was tension between them. There was attraction. There was genuine mutual respect wrapped in professional competition. But the show never collapsed it into simple romance or simple antagonism, and that restraint was unusual for a network drama in 1972. Female characters in mystery series of that era were typically decorative or helpless, or both. Carly Davidson was neither. She challenged Banacek. She sometimes beat him to conclusions. She pushed back against his arrogance with a precision that made it clear she found him fascinating and insufferable in almost exactly equal measure. Audiences responded to her with a loyalty that surprised even the production team. Carly wasn't a supporting character. She was a perspective, and that distinction made all the difference.
London? I beg your pardon.
Number 11. Boston wasn't just a backdrop, it was an argument. The decision to set Banacek firmly and specifically in Boston, rather than the more familiar Los Angeles or New York detective landscape, was one of the smartest creative choices the production team made, and it paid dividends that compounded across every episode. Boston in 1972 carried a very particular social atmosphere: old money, deep institutional hierarchies, a city that had been deciding who belonged and who didn't for 300 years. Dropping a Polish-American outsider into that environment wasn't just colorful, it was confrontational in a way that gave every case an extra layer of dramatic voltage. Banacek wasn't just solving crimes. He was walking into rooms where people like him were not expected, not welcomed, and certainly not supposed to win. The location shoots gave the show a textural authenticity that studio-bound productions couldn't replicate. Cobblestones, harbor light, architecture that had opinions about the people moving through it. Directors who understood Boston used the city the way the writers used the proverbs, as another form of character. Another way of saying something about who Thomas Banacek was and what it cost him to be exactly that, in exactly that place, without apology. Number 12. The guest cast reads like a Hollywood masterclass. Because Banacek operated on a rotating wheel schedule with a 90-minute runtime and a prestige reputation, it attracted guest performers of a caliber that straightforward weekly series rarely commanded. Established film actors who wouldn't typically commit to a television episode were willing to step into a Banacek mystery for the same reason audiences were willing to watch. It felt like something. The writing was sharp enough to give guest characters real weight rather than reducing them to suspects in a lineup. Directors took the material seriously, and the production values, the locations, the wardrobe, the cinematography, all communicated that this wasn't disposable television. It was a cut above. The result was a parade of accomplished performers bringing genuine craft to individual episodes, elevating already strong scripts into something closer to the theatrical experience the format was reaching for. For younger actors, a Banacek guest role carried real credibility. For established names, it offered the rare television experience of doing genuinely interesting work without the long-term commitment of a series regular contract. The show became a destination. That reputation, built carefully over 2 seasons, is a large part of why the series is remembered with such specific affection by those who watched it. Number 13. Peppard and the network fought constantly about the show's tone, and somehow the tension made it better. NBC's instinct throughout both seasons was to push Banacek toward broader, more accessible storytelling. Soften the arrogance, explain the proverbs, give the character more conventional emotional moments that general audiences could grip more easily. Peppard resisted every inch of that pressure, with the focused stubbornness of a man who understood his character more completely than any executive in any office in Burbank. His argument, made repeatedly and with increasing impatience, was that Banacek's refusal to soften was exactly what made him worth watching. The moment he started explaining himself, or apologizing for his confidence, he became just another television detective. The network never fully stopped pushing. Peppard never fully stopped pushing back. What resulted from that ongoing creative friction was a character who existed at the precise edge between accessible and uncompromising. He was watchable because he was specific, not despite it. NBC got the ratings, Peppard got to keep the fur coat. Neither side ever admitted the other was right, which was probably the most Banacek outcome imaginable. Number 14. The show launched a quiet conversation about ethnic representation that Hollywood mostly wasn't ready to have. In 1972, the idea of a protagonist who wore his Polish heritage not as a punchline, but as a point of pride, was genuinely unusual in American mainstream television. Banacek didn't downplay his background. He deployed it. The proverbs, the cultural references, the very deliberate way he occupied spaces that were designed to exclude people like him. All of it added up to a portrait of ethnic identity that was aspirational rather than apologetic. Polish American communities responded to the show with a loyalty and enthusiasm that surprised NBC and deeply moved Peppard, who received letters from viewers across the country describing what it meant to see someone like Banacek on screen, not struggling against his heritage, not assimilating past it, wearing it like the fur coat, with complete intention and zero embarrassment. Television has a long history of absorbing ethnic characters into generic heroism, sanding down the specific edges that make identity meaningful. Banacek refused that process, and the audiences who recognized what he was refusing understood exactly why it mattered. Number 15. The second season changed the dynamic, and not everyone welcomed the shift. When Banacek returned for its second run of episodes, the production made adjustments that reflected both network pressure and the natural evolution of a show finding its edges. Carly Davidson's role shifted, new supporting elements were introduced, the texture wasn't dramatically different. But for viewers who had formed a precise attachment to the first season's specific chemistry, any change at all felt significant. Television audiences in 1972 didn't have the ability to rewatch or revisit episodes the way modern viewers do, which meant their relationship with the show was built entirely on memory and anticipation. When something changed, it landed differently than it would today. The second season was still sharp, still built around genuinely inventive, impossible crimes, still carried entirely by Peppard's controlled and magnetic performance. But a sense had settled over the production that the creative peak had been reached, and that what came next would be a matter of sustaining rather than discovering. Some shows sustained brilliantly, Banacek sustained well, but the hunger of the first season, that feeling of something new being invented in real time, that was specific to the beginning, and everyone involved knew it.
It just means it didn't really disappear. They just couldn't find it.
Number 16. The cancellation landed without warning and still doesn't make complete sense. After 2 seasons and 18 feature-length episodes, NBC quietly removed Banacek from the Wednesday mystery movie wheel, without the kind of public announcement or stated reasoning that might have given the fanbase something to argue against. There was no dramatic final episode, no network press release explaining the decision. The show simply stopped appearing in the rotation, and viewers who tuned in expecting another impossible crime found something else entirely in the time slot. The official explanation pointed to ratings that, while respectable, didn't justify the production costs of a 90-minute rotating mystery series in an increasingly competitive landscape. But those who followed the behind-the-scenes dynamics pointed to something else. The ongoing friction between Peppard and the network had accumulated into something that made continuation feel more costly than it was worth, in purely relational terms. Whether the cancellation was primarily financial or primarily personal probably depends on who you ask, and the people who know for certain have never all told the same story. What's not in dispute is the reaction. Loyal viewers were stunned and furious, and their letters to NBC continued arriving for months after the final episode had already aired. Number 17. Peppard spent years afterward believing the show would return. He talked about Banacek in interviews with a specificity and affection that made it clear the character had never fully left him. He discussed potential storylines. He talked about where Thomas Banacek would be now, what cases he might take, how he might have changed or refused to change as the years accumulated. For a man with Peppard's complicated relationship with Hollywood, a career that had moved from golden era film promise through television and back again in ways not always of his choosing, Banacek represented something particular, a character he had genuinely fought for and genuinely won, something that was his in a way that few of his roles had been. The revival never materialized. The industry moved on. Peppard moved on professionally, most famously to the A-Team in the 1980s, which brought him an entirely new generation of fans. But people who interviewed him across those decades consistently noted that when Banacek came up, something shifted in him. The energy changed. However, he sat forward. He got specific. That's what it looks like when a performer knows they did something worth remembering and isn't entirely sure the world remembers it correctly.
What's good for?
Wait for me. I won't be very long.
Mr. Banacek?
Number 18. The impossible crime format influenced decades of television that followed without ever quite crediting the source. The locked room mystery, the vanishing object, the crime that defies physical logic until a single elegant explanation reorders everything. These devices didn't begin with Banacek, but the show demonstrated with unusual clarity how effectively they translated to the long-form television format. Writers' rooms across the subsequent decades absorbed that lesson and built shows around variations of the same principle. The puzzle-driven procedural, the cerebral detective who sees what others miss, the solution that recontextualizes everything the audience thought they understood about the crime. All of it slows partly from the template Banacek refined across 18 episodes. The show is rarely cited in those conversations because television history has a short institutional memory and a tendency to credit innovation to whatever came most recently, rather than tracing it to its origins. But scholars of the genre know where to look, and when they look at Banacek, they find a show that was doing something genuinely sophisticated, with a format that most of its contemporaries were still treating as simple entertainment. Number 19. The fur coat deserves its own monument. More than the Rolls-Royce, more than the Proverbs, more than the brownstone or the cognac. The fur coat is the image that defines Thomas Banacek in the visual memory of everyone who watched the show. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't meant to be. A full-length fur coat in 1972. Boston Red is an act of deliberate provocation, a declaration of wealth indifference, and complete indifference to the opinions of people who found it excessive, which was everyone, which was the point. Peppard wore it like armor and like theater simultaneously, and the costume department understood that their job with Banacek was never to dress a character, but to dress a position. Every wardrobe choice reinforced the same statement. I have built something extraordinary. I am not going to pretend otherwise to make you comfortable. The coat became iconic enough that it circulated through fan discussions for decades after the show ended, appearing in anniversary articles and retrospectives as the single image most likely to trigger immediate recognition in anyone who had watched. Costume design rarely gets credited for carrying a show's identity. The fur coat carried Banacek's identity completely.
Check. That's Polish, right?
Right.
I'm actually a second.
Number 20. The show was never given a proper ending, and the audience never forgave the network for it. 18 episodes, 2 seasons. A character fully realized, and a format genuinely mastered, and then nothing. No finale, no closure, no moment where Thomas Banacek got to walk away on his own terms rather than the network's. For a series that was built so entirely around a man who controlled every situation he entered, the abrupt stop felt like a profound betrayal of the show's own internal logic. Banacek always solved the case. He always collected his 15%. He always walked back to the Rolls-Royce with that particular expression that said he had never doubted the outcome for a single moment. Except this time, the case didn't get solved. The show just stopped mid-investigation, mid-sentence almost, and left one of television's most self-possessed characters frozen in permanent incompletion. Fans have spent 50 years finishing the story in their imaginations. It's a strange kind of tribute, the kind only a truly great character inspires. The need to keep going, even when the cameras stopped. Banacek deserved better than he got. He also, characteristically, would have been the last person to admit it. Bonus fact. The proverbs were real enough that a small Polish-language publisher quietly assembled a collection of them after the show ended, attributing several to traditional sources that researchers later couldn't fully verify. Nobody minded. The lines had lived in the show so convincingly that their origins stopped mattering. They felt true in the way that all good folklore feels true, which is to say they carried the weight of something earned rather than invented. Peppard kept a handwritten list of his favorite ones from the series, and people who visited his home in later years reported seeing it framed near his desk. "A Polish boy from nowhere," he'd say, quoting one of the show's own lines back at himself. And then he'd smile the way Banacek smiled, like he already knew how the story ended and wasn't telling. That's the thing about Thomas Banacek. He never quite left the building. He just stopped filing insurance claims.